Hello and welcome back. On this video I'm going to be talking about Brassaiopsis, which are a group of shrubs as part of the Araliaceae family, and a lot of people like them, particularly here in the UK, because they're quite rare and unusual, especially with their leaf shape. And there are a few plants that I've got in the garden which I thought I'd just show everyone and showcase as to where they are at the moment, and just give out some information as to what I have. I'm not necessarily an expert on these, but I do grow some of them and it might be relevant for some people. Now I have two plants here, so the one on the left and one on the right, either side of the Scheffra macrophylla. The first of which many people will know, and that is Brassaiopsis Mitus, and that's this one here, which I've just recently repotted. Okay, so Brassaiopsis Mitus has been in this pot, which I think is a 25-litre pot, for around a year, and I just thought it might be the time to repot it. Obviously these do grow into trees, and you can see there that there was a lot of gravel at the bottom to help with the drainage, but those roots are completely enveloping the bottom of the pot, so definitely is the right time for this. So it is going up to a 30 litre at the moment, just to give it a bit of space, but we'll potentially, well, later on this season or even next year, I might have to go into something significantly bigger than that. Now this can get pretty tall. I've seen some in some Facebook groups where people have planted them out in the ground and they look like they're already 3, 4, 5 meters high. And the reason for the interest in these plants is because of the leaf shape. They almost have that snowflake like look to them, and really dissected big leaves, which are very unlike many of the plants that people grow in their gardens. They're also, you'll see on all the Brassaiopsis, they have that really spiny stem, and I did repot this yesterday and it needed some gloves and some cardboard to almost pull it out of the pot, because it is sharp and they do get some of those spines on the petioles as well. People don't necessarily grow them for their flower. It is all down to the foliage, and these can get really, really big. They do like to be, from what I've seen so far, is relatively covered in kind of that part shade area, and some of which need more shade than others. I've found Mitus to be more sun tolerant than some of the others, but they do like to be not damp but quite moist in the soil, but for it to be free drains. They don't want to be sat in water and bogged down either. But mine are all in pots, so I haven't necessarily planted them out and tested that necessarily, but that is from reports of what people have said. What is good about them is they'll continue to put out new leaves regularly throughout the growing season as well, and they'll put on a decent amount of height. If I move over to the right, this is another Brassaiopsis, and this is very similar to Mitus, and this is Fatordis. This one, as you might have seen in some other videos, is a little bit further behind in terms of how big the leaves are, and you can see that they're a little bit more folded over and curled over, almost like the Rex plants that are up here. However, this is in a smaller pot, and one of my jobs to do is to pot that up. This is a little bit of a younger tree, but I think the roots are starting to fill that pot, so I do want to get some more space there, because they do fill out pots pretty quickly. This is in a little bit more shade as well, but you can see that kind of snowflake type look to them, which gives you that really interesting structure in the garden. Now these are supposedly more of the hardy variations of Brassaiopsis. I think the Mitus was from kind of the Himalayan region, so that mountainous area, and I've seen reports of them getting down to kind of -8 and beyond. Again, I haven't necessarily tested that here. Mine have been left in a pot. They do defoliate over winter, but they can be semi-evergreen if you do get a mild winter. This one was untested as I kept it in the pergola, so it did get cold, but it didn't get the frost, and that's the thing that obviously will make them defoliate. And we've got 4 Brassaiopsis here in this picture, and I'll walk you through them one by one as to how they're getting on. Here we have Brassaiopsis HPA, again that really spiny stem, but the interesting thing about this one is you can see that foliage, that new foliage that's coming through, if it decides to focus, is a really kind of deep purple. But as they develop, that's a Scheffler leaf, they do harden off into that kind of greeny colour, that deeper green colour. And they almost have spines on the end of the leaves as well. You can see there that kind of purple coloration as it's just starting to develop and get significantly bigger. This is some of the leaves from previous years. Now this is reported to not be as hardy as some of the other types of Brassaiopsis, but one that's probably more readily available to get a hold of. I think they do seed, from what I've seen anyway, and the amount that's going around more readily, I would imagine. That hasn't done it for me, but it is a relatively small plant. But still, interesting one, very different. It doesn't have that snowflake leaf, but the structure of it is really cool and interesting. Definitely one that should be growing in more of a shady condition as well. I found that these do seem to kind of burn off quite quickly. So it is worth mentioning that the HPA is not as hardy as the Mitus, so it's definitely one that you'd need if you're keeping it in a pot. Try and keep it under cover in a greenhouse or very close to the house is my recommendation with that one. And then here we have definitely grown up the list in terms of one of my more favourite Brassaiopsis, and this is Bordnerii, with the really big lobed leaves. They kind of broaden out and then get really thin at the ends, and they do get to a pretty decent size, and that's my hand in comparison. I've just found that it puts out its leaves a little bit later than things like the Mitus, but very kind of spiny stem like the others. I don't know if they get bigger leaves than Mitus, but they are really exotic looking, and again not as hardy as some of the Mitus. I haven't tested out and I didn't want to risk the plant. Now another Brassaiopsis that is reportedly one of the hardiest specimens of the group, and that is Brassaiopsis dumacola, and I have bought another small one of these. Seem to be getting more readily available, but they are a plant for the collectors. Now I might be tempted to plant this out at some stage when I find the right spot for it, because I do have that other one to kind of fall back on, but it's almost like a mix between, for me, the Mitus and the Bordnerii. It has that snowflake shape to the leaf, and yeah, it's just brilliant. I mean, look at that. I don't really know what more to say about it, to be honest. It's just a fantastic looking plant for any garden. What I should mention as well for a lot of these plants is, particularly these 3, is to grow these in shade. They do like partial to full shade to get the best out of them, and also try and keep them out of the strong winds as well. Now this one in particular, from looking at Krug, they've had theirs down to -15 degrees C, so obviously quite a hardy plant out of the group, so one that you could probably be a bit more confident in planting it out in the garden, pretty much wherever you live in the UK, and hope to get it through. And then we have the final Brassaiopsis, which is a more recent purchase for me down at the Rare Plant Fair in Cornwall, and this is Brassaiopsis xmyamar, or it's potentially glomulata, I believe, if that's how you pronounce it. Because it's relatively new, not a lot is known about this is in regards to its hardiness, but if it is kind of from Burma or somewhere like that, you'd probably predict that it's not going to be as hardy, but quite an interesting leaf structure, and to me it almost looks very Scheffler like. It's got those kind of 5 leaflets on one leaf, and it'll be interesting to see how this one does develop as it gets a little bit more mature. But for the moment, it is going to be kind of sheltered in a lot of shade, and it's going to be overwintered in the pergola, and we'll see if we can get it through without defoliating. But I think you can see with this picture here, obviously a lot of these plants are still relatively young, but it does fit into that really tropical vibe and background, and you can add a lot to a garden with these plants. They're definitely one to keep an eye out for. They obviously are more expensive currently to get a hold of, but you'd hope with more people gaining interest in them that seed will become available, more plants will become available. But a lot of people are out on the hunt for them. I saw in the rare plant fair that people were charging for some of the big ones down at Dragain, I think it was at where we were at. But a lot of these are in pretty similar kind of growing conditions outside of the Mitus and the Fatordis. They're in slightly more sun, but these are all pretty well protected in a bit of shade. They've got some quite moist but hopefully free drain soil. You can see the ones that are planted are in some raised beds, and they are mostly protected through the winter as well. Obviously there's a few there with the dumacola, the Mitus, the Fatordis that you could probably predict you could plant out into your garden and get through, and there's starting to be more reports of people doing that and coming back as well. So if you're looking for something that you need to fit into a shady spot in your garden with some moist soil, you want some big leaves, you want some interesting foliage, definitely consider some of these plants.